everyone, and welcome to today's session. And today we'll be discussing the theory related to the chapter Human Reproduction. So this is the part 5 of the lecture. Before starting this lecture, I just want to give you one information that the images, text, and other materials used in the presentations are for education purposes only. We respect the intellectual property rights of the original creators and owners. If you are the owner and have any concerns or issues, please contact us at sathee@itk.ac.in and we shall remove the content immediately. Please note that parts of the content may have been generated using generative AI, which is experimental. So what are the objectives of today's session? What we will learn in today's session? So we'll be talking about the menstrual cycle. So we will understand and we will talk about menstrual cycle. So we will understand what are the changes that are occurring in the uterus, basically in the uterine wall during different stages of the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is divided into certain stages. We'll talk about these stages, what are these stages and what are happening in these stages, what is happening to the endometrium, okay, what all hormones are released during menstrual cycle, okay. Then we will use the graphical representation to understand the menstrual cycle. So we'll understand how the hormones are released, from which you can say endocrine glands the hormones are released, and what are the functions of these hormones, and at which stages these hormones are released during the menstrual cycle. So we'll be talking about the menstrual cycle in this session. Then we will summarize this entire session, and then we'll be talking about the DPP related to this topic, menstrual cycle. So let's begin with today's session. So what is menstrual cycle? So the reproductive cycle in the female primates, for example, monkeys, apes, and human being, this is called the menstrual cycle. So basically, what is menstrual cycle? It is a reproductive cycle and it occurs in female primates. Examples, you can see monkeys, apes, and human being also. And this is termed as menstrual cycle. And the first menstruation begins at puberty and is called the menarche. So onset of the menstruation, this is known as menarche. And when does menstruation starts? It starts at the puberty. So first of all, what is puberty? So it is that time of life, okay, where a lot of physiological changes occurs. Okay. And after the puberty, the person becomes, you can say, reproductively active. The person becomes sexually mature. Okay. So a lot of morphological and physiological changes occurs during the puberty. The person becomes sexually mature. That person can reproduce, can produce offerings. So in females, secondary sexual characteristic develops. In males also secondary sexual characteristic develops. In males, secondary sexual characteristics are like appearance of facial hair, pubic hair, deepening of the voice, enlargement of the Adam's apple. In females, breast development, then onset of the menstrual cycle. These are some of the secondary sexual characteristics. So the onset of the menstrual cycle, this is known as the menarche. This is a scientific term given to onset of menstrual cycle. Now in human females, menstruation is repeated at an average interval of 28 to 29 days. So if we talk about human females, okay, what is the duration of the menstrual cycle? So it is 28 to 29 days. So this is the average, 28 to 29 days. So menstrual cycle is repeated at an interval of about 28 to 29 days. And the cycle of events starting from one menstruation till the next one, this is called as the menstrual cycle. Okay. So from one menstrual cycle to another menstrual cycle, to other menstruation, this is known as the menstrual cycle. Now, one ovum is released during the middle of each menstrual cycle. Okay. So only one, you can say, secondary oocyte or the ovum. This is released during the middle of the menstrual cycle. Or simply you can say, in a month, only one egg is released. Only one secondary oocyte is released from the ovaries. Okay, because menstrual cycle is for 28 to 29 days. So this is almost a month. And these eggs are released, ovum is released in the middle of the menstrual cycle. So if menstrual cycle is of 28 days, mid of menstrual cycle will be 14 days. So the ovulation means the release of the egg. It occurs in the mid of the menstrual cycle. Now the cycle starts with the menstrual phase when menstrual flow occurs and it lasts for 3 to 5 days. So this menstrual cycle occurs with the menstrual phase. So you can say it begins with, or the first phase is the menstrual phase during which the bleeding occurs. Okay, or you can say when menstrual flow occurs. And what is the duration of this phase? 3 to 5 days. Now the menstrual flow results due to breakdown of the endometrium lining of the uterus and its blood vessels, which forms liquid that comes out through the vagina. So why does this bleeding occurs? This bleeding or the menstruation or this menstrual flow is because of the shedding of the endometrial lining or breakdown of the endometrial lining. Or you can say endometrium, which is the innermost layer of the uterus. So there are three, you can say, layers of the uterus wall. Okay. Perimetrium, myometrium, and endometrium. So this endometrium, this breaks because it becomes very thin. Okay. And due to the breakage of the endometrium, there is bleeding. Okay, so this endometrium along with its blood vessels, it breaks and it forms a fluid that comes out through the vagina. Now, menstruation only occurs if the released ovum is not fertilized. Okay, so this bleeding will occur only when the ovum is not fertilized, when the egg is not fertilized. Fertilized means if there is no fertilization, if there is no fusion of the male and the female gamete. Now, why does this happen? Okay, so we'll talk about this also. Why does this happen? Why the endometrium breaks? Why it becomes very thin and then it breaks? Okay, so what happens when the ovum is not fertilized? Then the level of progesterone decrease. Okay, why the level of progesterone decrease? We'll also talk about this. Now this progesterone, this helps to maintain this endometrium lining. If the level of progesterone is high, then the endometrium will be thick. If the level of progesterone is low, then the endometrium will be very thin. So the level of progesterone, it decreases. So endometrium also becomes very thin and it is finally broken down. Now, lack of menstruation may be indicative of the pregnancy. If there is no menstruation, if there is no menstrual cycle, then it may be, they are saying, may be indicative of pregnancy because there are some other reasons also for the lack of menstruation, such as stress or certain health conditions, or if the female is taking a lot of hormones or medicine. Okay, so however, the lack of the menstruation can also be caused due to some other underlying causes like the stress, okay, and the poor health as well. If the lady is under stress, then a lot of hormonal changes occurs, so this may affect the menstruation. Then because of the poor health also, okay, if the lady is not healthy, then obviously her physiology will be affected. So everything is dependent on the hormones. Okay, menstrual cycle is regulated by the hormones. So if there is imbalance of the hormones, then obviously the menstrual cycle will be affected. Okay. Then if the lady is taking medicines, okay, or drugs, this can also affect the menstrual cycle. Menstrual phase is followed by the follicular phase. So next phase is the follicular phase. First one was the menstrual phase. So what happens in the follicular phase now? In follicular phase, development of the follicle occurs. Now during this phase, the primary follicles in the ovary grow to become a fully mature Graafian follicle, and simultaneously the endometrium of uterus regenerates through the proliferation. Now what is happening? In follicular phase, the development of the follicle is occurring. Means primary follicle is formed, and then from primary follicles, secondary follicles, and then tertiary follicles, and then finally Graafian follicles are formed. Okay. So we have already discussed this, how the follicles they develop. In primary follicles, primary oocyte was present. Okay, secondary follicle also contains primary oocyte. Then tertiary follicle also contains primary oocyte. Then the primary oocyte in the tertiary follicle, it divides further. It completes its first meiotic division and forms a secondary oocyte. Secondary oocyte is present in the Graafian follicle. Then the rupture of the Graafian follicle occurs and the secondary oocyte is released. Okay. And so you can see in the follicular phase, the follicles are developing. Primary follicle transform into Graafian follicle. And what else is happening? So simultaneously, endometrium of the uterus, it regenerates through proliferation. Now the endometrium starts regenerating. Okay, now the major events of menstrual cycle are shown in the figure 2.9. So we will discuss this figure now. Okay. So basically there are 4 phases in the menstrual cycle. Menstruation phase, followed by follicular phase, also known as a proliferative phase. Then ovulation occurs in the mid of the menstrual cycle. So this is around 14 days. The next phase is the luteal phase, also known as the secretory phase. And the next cycle begins then. So here this figure is very important. So what is happening here? You can see. So they have divided all the events according to the different stages here. Okay. So we'll talk about the uterine events. Okay. And basically within this, we'll talk about the endometrium. How the endometrium changes in these stages. Then we'll talk about the ovarian hormones. Ovarian hormones means hormone released by the ovary. So these are estrogen and progesterone. Then we'll talk about these follicle developments. Okay, ovarian events. And then we'll talk about the pituitary hormone levels. So these hormones, FSH and LH, they are secreted by the anterior pituitary. Now you can see, let's talk about the endometrium now. So this is the menstruation phase. Endometrium is thinnest in the menstruation phase. You can write this. Okay, remember this. The endometrium is thinnest in the menstrual phase, and it sheds. There is a breakdown of the endometrium, which leads to bleeding. Then this is the follicular phase. You can see what is happening here. Endometrium is regenerating. Endometrium has become thick now. Okay, and the follicles are also developing in the follicular phase. Here, these follicles develop because of the release of the follicle stimulating hormone from the anterior pituitary. So this follicle stimulating hormone, it stimulates the development of the follicles. So from the primary follicle, from secondary to tertiary, and from tertiary to mature Graafian follicle will be formed. This mature follicle is Graafian follicle. Then you can see here what is happening. These follicles, they release estrogen. So the estrogen level is increasing slowly, and it is maximum before the ovulation. Okay, this estrogen is being released by these developing follicles. Here, and you can see this estrogen has 2 effects, negative effect and the positive. So there is a negative feedback loop and the positive feedback loop. What happens in the negative feedback loop? When the estrogen level is low, then it will suppress the release and synthesis of FSH and LH. Okay, but after some time, when the estrogen level is high, then there is a shift. Now estrogen will promote FSH and LH. So when the estrogen level is low, then it will suppress the FSH and LH. Okay, why it will suppress? Okay, initially it will suppress so that there is only limited amount of follicular development. Okay, so you can say it want to limit the development of the follicles. So these many follicles should only develop. And then next, when the estrogen level increases the threshold value, then it promotes FSH and LH. So here you can see estrogen level is maximum here. Okay. And when the estrogen level is high or it is around maximum, then it will promote FSH and LH release from the anterior pituitary. That's why the level of FSH and LH is maximum here, just before ovulation. Okay. Now this LH, luteinizing hormone, this will cause the rupture of the mature follicle, also known as the Graafian follicle. Okay, so this sudden increase in the LH, a rapid increase in the LH, this is known as the LH surge. And this LH surge leads to the rupture of the Graafian follicle. And when the Graafian follicle is released, then the secondary oocyte is released. Clear? And then the remnants of the Graafian follicle, it changes into corpus luteum. Now, corpus luteum acts as a temporary endocrine gland. It secretes progesterone. So next stage is luteal phase, in which corpus luteal is formed. It also known as secretory phase, because this corpus luteum secretes progesterone, which is shown here. So the level of progesterone increases and it is maximum during the luteal phase. So level of progesterone is maximum during the luteal phase. Progesterone helps to maintain the endometrium. So the endometrium thickness increases, and endometrium thickness is also maximum during the luteal phase. Now, if there is no fertilization, then the corpus luteum will degenerate. And when the corpus luteum degenerates, it forms corpus albicans. So this is regressing corpus luteum. It is degenerating and it forms corpus albicans. Now, as the corpus luteum degenerates, so there is no secretion of progesterone. So progesterone level is decreasing now again. As the progesterone level decreases, the endometrium thickness also decreases, and the next cycle will start, because again the endometrium will break. Okay. Now this FSH and LH, their level also decrease after the ovulation, because their requirement was only till before ovulation. FSH leads to the development of the follicles. LH causes the rupture of this Graafian follicle. And then after the follicular phase or after the ovulation, these two hormones are not required. Okay. Now, which hormone stimulates the release of these pituitary hormones, FSH and LH? So there is a hormone, gonadotrophin releasing hormone. This is secreted from the hypothalamus, and this gonadotrophin releasing hormone stimulates this anterior pituitary to release gonadotrophins, which are known as follicle stimulating hormone and LH. Okay. Now, these changes in the ovary and in the uterus are induced by changes in the level of pituitary and the ovarian hormones. So we were talking about the follicular phase. In follicular phase, the follicles development is occurring due to release of the FSH. Endometrium, you can say, also starts proliferating, its thickness starts increasing. And this is all because of the release of the pituitary hormones known as FSH and LH, as well as the ovarian hormones. So these follicles, they start, or they secrete, or they release estrogen also. Estrogen also helps to maintain the endometrium lining, but basically it is progesterone. Okay, now estrogen, as I have told you, it can follow the negative feedback and positive feedback depending on its concentration. Okay. Now the secretion of gonadotrophins. What are gonadotrophins? LH and FSH. This increases gradually during the follicular phase, as we have seen in the figure, and stimulates follicular development as well as secretion of the estrogen by the growing follicles. So you can see here the FSH and LH, they are released from the anterior pituitary. Their level slowly increases during the follicular phase, which leads to the development of the follicles. These follicles, they secrete this estrogen. Clear? And you can see there is a maximum estrogen level just before ovulation, because estrogen is being secreted by the developing follicles. Okay. Now this estrogen, if it is in less concentration, then it will inhibit FSH and LH. If it is in more concentration, or when the estrogen reaches the threshold value, when it is more than the threshold value, then it will stimulate the FSH and LH. So here the estrogen level is maximum. So it is stimulating the release of FSH and LH. So that's why FSH and LH is also maximum here. Okay. Now both LH and FSH attain a peak level in the middle of the cycle, about 14th day. So the reason I've already told you, because estrogen is, you can say, stimulating the anterior pituitary to release FSH and LH. FSH and LH. So the estrogen level is high now. Now there is a rapid secretion of LH. So this is very important. Rapid secretion of LH, not gradual secretion of LH. There is a rapid secretion of LH known as the LH surge, leading to its maximum level during the mid-cycle, called the LH surge. And this LH surge induces the rupture of the Graafian follicle and thereby the release of the ovum, and this process is known as the ovulation. So which hormone causes the rupture of the Graafian follicle? This is LH, known as the luteinizing hormone. And it is one of the gonadotrophins released by the anterior pituitary. And there is a rapid secretion of the LH, okay, which causes ovulation, means release of the egg. So you can see here, this is the LH surge they have shown you. Okay. A rapid increase in the level of LH just before the ovulation. This LH surge stimulates the mature follicles to rupture. And you can see here the secondary oocyte is released at the mid of the menstrual cycle. Now, next phase is the ovulation or the ovulatory phase, which is at the mid of the menstrual cycle. The ovulatory phase is followed by the luteal phase, where the corpus luteum is formed from the remnants of the Graafian follicle. So this is followed by the luteal phase, during which the remaining parts of the Graafian follicle transform as the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is formed. The corpus luteum acts as a temporary endocrine gland because it secretes progesterone. Progesterone helps to maintain the endometrium. As long as the endometrium is maintained, there will be no menstruation. Okay, clear? So question can come from here. As corpus luteum is a temporary endocrine gland, why? Then what hormone does it release? What is the role of that hormone? And if the female is continuously taking the progesterone hormone, then will the menstruation cycle occur? So what will be the answer to this question? So the female is taking continuously progesterone hormone, or she is taking pills that contain the progesterone hormone, then the endometrium thickness will be maintained. So there will be no shedding of the endometrium because it is very thick. So this happens during pregnancy also. The level of progesterones, they are maintained. So the endometrium is always thick. It is thick. Now, the corpus luteum secretes large amount of progesterone and very less amount of estrogen also. But basically, it is secreting large amount of progesterone, and this progesterone is essential for maintenance of the endometrium. Means it will maintain the thickness of the endometrium. Thickness of the endometrium should be maintained for achieving successful pregnancy also. It is required for the implantation of the blastocyst. We'll talk about the implantation also in our upcoming sessions. Now, such an endometrium is necessary for the implantation of the fertilized ovum and other events of the pregnancy. So, we'll talk about implantation. What is implantation? It is the attachment of the blastocyst to the endometrium. Okay. So, such an endometrium is necessary for the implantation of the fertilized ovum and other events of pregnancy. Then, during pregnancy, all events of the menstrual cycle stop and there is no menstruation. Okay. Because the level of progesterone, they are maintained. Okay. The corpus luteum will not degenerate, because corpus luteum degenerates when there is no, you can say, fertilization, when the egg is not fertilized. When the egg is fertilized, then the level of progesterones are maintained. Okay. And the endometrium thickness will be maintained, so there will be no menstruation. In the absence of fertilization, what happens? The corpus luteum will degenerate. Now, as the corpus luteum will degenerate, then what will happen? The progesterone level will decrease. Now, this causes disintegration of the endometrium, leading to menstruation, marking a new cycle. So, the new cycle begins now. Because the level of progesterone decreased, the endometrium again becomes thin, and there will be breakdown of the endometrium, leading to menstruation. So, a new cycle starts after this. So, each cycle is of around 28 to 29 months, and one egg is released during each menstrual cycle. In human being, menstrual cycle ceases around 50 years of age, and this is termed as the menopause. So, there was one major difference between spermatogenesis and oogenesis. In spermatogenesis, what happened? The sperms, they are released, or they are formed, or sperm formation occurs even in the old man also. Although these sperms are not that much viable. Okay. But in females, the oogenesis, it ceases, the egg formation ceases, it stops. And this is known as the menopause. And it occurs around 50 years of age in the females. Now, cyclic menstruation is an indicator of normal reproductive phase and extends between menarche and the menopause. Okay. So, this cyclic menstruation is a cyclic event. There are a lot of changes occurring in the menstrual cycle. A lot of hormonal changes are occurring. Okay, there is changes in the endometrium, changes in the ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone, changes in the anterior pituitary hormones. Okay, so cyclic menstruation is an indicator of the normal reproductive phase, and it extends between the menarche and the menopause. Menarche means starting of the menstruation, and menopause means the end of the menstrual cycle, when there is no egg formation now. So, ceasing of the menstrual cycle, this occurs at around 50 years of age in the females. Now, if there is no menstruation, or if there is some changes in the menstrual cycle, then what happens? The female should consult the doctor, because if there is no menstrual cycle, it is not always that it is the indicator of pregnancy. There can be certain health issues or certain stress that might be affecting the menstrual cycle. Okay, now let's summarize a little bit our previous sessions. So, we talked about the male reproductive system. So, the main components are testes, which are known as the primary sex organ. Testes are present in the scrotum. because scrotum has less temperature. Okay, it has lower temperature as compared to the normal body temperature. Okay, so in scrotum, 2 to 2.5 degrees Celsius less temperature is present as compared to the normal body temperature. Then the male reproductive system consists of accessory ducts, which are retitestes, vas efferentia, epididymis, vas deferens. Then accessory glands, which are seminal vesicles, prostate gland, and bulbourethral gland. Then the external genitalia, which is known as the penis. So you should know the function of accessory ducts. So they help in the transport, storage, and maturation of the sperm. Then the accessory glands, the secretion of the accessory glands, known as the seminal plasma. It is the major constituent of the semen. Then penis, this is the copulatory organ. And the erection of penis is very important for the process of insemination. Then what are the key features of the male reproductive system? The testes, which are primary sex organs, they produce sperm as well as the hormones. That's why they are known as the primary sex organ. These hormones are male hormones known as the androgens, basically testosterone. The scrotum maintains lower temperatures for sperm production. And testes contain seminiferous tubules, and within the seminiferous tubule, the spermatogenesis occur. So the inner side of the seminiferous tubule consists of the spermatogonia as well as the Sertoli cells. Spermatogonia undergo meiosis to form the sperm. So in seminiferous tubule, sperm formation occurs or sperm is produced, and it also consists of, and the male reproductive system also consists of accessory glands such as seminal vesicle, prostate, and the bulbourethral gland. So you should know the functions of the seminal vesicle, prostate, and bulbourethral gland as well. Okay. So seminal vesicles, the secretion of seminal vesicles, they are rich in fructose, and prostaglandin fructose is used as a source of nutrition by the sperms. Then prostate gland, this secretes the milky alkaline fluid. Okay, then bulbourethral gland. This bulbourethral gland, it lubricates the urethra. It also neutralizes the acidic environment of the urethra due to urination. Now, female reproductive system. What are the main component? Ovaries, they are the primary sex organ. Then oviduct, also known as the fallopian tubes. Uterus, cervix, vagina, external genitalia is present. And mammary gland, you can say this is also associated with the female reproductive system. Although mammary gland is not directly involved in the reproduction, but it is involved in the child care because milk is produced by the mammary gland. This milk, known as the colostrum, is very healthy, it's very nutritious, and it also provides immunity to the newborn because of the presence of the antibody IgA, which is immunoglobulin A. Now, what are the key features of female reproductive system? In ovaries, eggs are produced and hormones are also produced, estrogen and progesterone. Now, uterus, it has 3 layers. Perimetrium, this is the outermost membranous layer. Then myometrium, this is the middle layer, known as the, and it is made up of smooth muscles. Then endometrium, this is the innermost wall, okay, made up of glandular tissue. Then fallopian tubes, also known as oviduct, they capture and transport the eggs. So this is a part of the accessory ducts in the females. And then mammary gland, they produce the milk. So mammary gland have alveoli cells, and these alveoli cells secrete the milk. A reproductive process, gametogenesis, which is the formation of gametes. Okay. This is the first step during the sexual reproduction. After the gametes are formed, then the insemination process occurs, means transfer of the sperm into the female genital tract. Then fertilization occurs, means the fusion of the male and the female gamete. Then implantation of the blastocyst in the uterine wall, or attachment of the blastocyst into the uterine wall. This is known as implantation. Then gestation, which is of 9 months in humans, during which the fetal development occurs, and then is the birth of the child or childbirth. which is known as parturition. So you should remember all of these terms. These are the scientific terms you should remember. So they can ask you in the exam, what is the correct sequence of the reproductive process? So this is the correct sequence here. Notable difference, men produce sperms throughout the life. Women stop producing eggs around 50 years of menopause. And then there was a lot of differences between spermatogenesis and oogenesis. Spermatogenesis, it starts at the puberty. Oogenesis, okay, which is formation of the egg, it starts in the fetal stage. Okay, in the fetal ovary. Okay, the oogonia formed in the fetal stage only, and no more oogonia formed after the birth. Okay, then there were a lot of other differences that we have already discussed in our previous sessions. Now we talked about the menstrual cycle today. Menstrual cycle is a reproductive cycle in the female primates with an average duration of 28 to 29 days in the humans. Now, menarche marks the beginning of the menstruation at the puberty, while menopause marks its end around age 50. So this menstruation starts at the puberty. Okay, although the oogonia, the primary oocyte, they are produced before the birth, and these primary oocyte then they are arrested at the prophase 1 of meiosis 1 until puberty, and then they complete their meiosis 1 division after the puberty. Now there are 4 main phases in the menstrual cycle. You have to remember this. First one is the menstrual cycle, then during which the bleeding occurs. It is around, duration is 3 to 5 days. Then there is a follicular phase during which the follicle development occurs. Then it is followed by the ovulatory phase, okay, in which the ovulation occurs, means the release of the egg. This occurs at around 14 days, means at the mid of the menstrual cycle. And last one is the luteal phase. So luteal phase, what happens in the luteal phase? There is the development of the corpus luteum. Okay, this corpus luteum acts as a temporary endocrine gland. So you should remember all these phases. Then you should mention about what is happening to the uterus wall, endometrium, then what is happening to the ovarian hormones, what is happening to the anterior pituitary hormones, what are the level of these hormones in these different stages. Okay. Now you should know why the level of estrogen is maximum just before ovulation, why the level of FSH and LH is maximum just before the ovulation. You should know the role of the estrogen. Here, estrogen is released by these developing follicles. And when the estrogen level is low, then it will, you can say, inhibit the secretion of FSH and LH from anterior pituitary. When the estrogen level increases the threshold value, then it will stimulate the release of the FSH and LH. Now, the menstrual phase lasts for 3 to 5 days, involves the breakdown of the uterine lining, resulting in the menstrual flow. During the follicular phase, primary follicles develop into mature Graafian follicles, and the uterine lining regenerates. So this Graafian follicle consists of the secondary oocyte. Now the hormone FSH and LH increases during the follicular phase, reaching peak levels around day 14th, means the mid-cycle of the menstrual cycle. Okay. So this follicle stimulating hormone helps in the development of the follicles. And this LH, luteinizing hormone, so there is a rapid increase in the luteinizing hormone levels. This triggers the ovulation, releasing one ovum from the Graafian follicle. Okay, remember, one ovum or secondary oocyte from the Graafian follicle. Now in the luteal phase, what happened? Remaining follicle transform into corpus luteum, which secretes progesterone to maintain the endometrium. If fertilization doesn't occur, when there is no fusion of the male and the female gamete, the corpus luteum degenerates, leading to menstruation and starting a new cycle. In the absence of menstruation, okay, So if there is no menstruation, it might indicate pregnancy or some other factors like stress and poor health. Okay. So reproductive cycle in female primates is known as menstrual cycle. We have already discussed this. Menstrual cycle starts when the female attains sexual maturation, means puberty. One egg is released per menstrual cycle. Now, there's cyclic changes in the ovary and the uterus during menstrual cycle are induced by changes in the levels of pituitary and the ovarian hormones. So this was the end of this session. Okay, we have discussed the theory. Okay, now we'll discuss the DPP related to this topic, menstrual cycle. Now let's begin with the first question now. Which phase of menstrual cycle is characterized by the breakdown of the endometrial lining? Okay. So they are talking about the phase of the menstrual cycle, okay, where the breakdown of the endometrium occurs. Here, so there are 4 phases of the menstrual cycle: menstruation phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, and then the luteal phase. Okay, so what are the options here? Follicular phase, luteal phase, menstrual phase, and ovulatory phase. What will be the correct answer here? Okay, here the correct answer is option number C here. The breakdown or the shedding of the endometrium lining occurs in the menstruation phase or the menstrual phase. So in the menstrual phase, the endometrium is thinnest. Okay? And it is so thin that it breaks. And this causes bleeding. So there is a release of liquid, okay, from the vagina, which is known as the menstrual fluid. This consists of the tissue and the blood as well, because the blood vessels also breaks along with the tissue of the endometrium. So there are 4 phases of the menstrual cycle. First is the menstruation phase, menstrual phase in which menstruation occurs, bleeding occurs, and the duration of this phase is around 3 to 5 days. Okay, after menstruation, there is a follicular phase in which follicle development occurs, and then there is an ovulatory phase in which there is a release of the egg. This ovulatory phase occurs at mid of the menstrual cycle, and then the last phase is the luteal phase, and then the next cycle starts if there is no fertilization. Now, next is what triggers ovulation during the menstrual cycle. So, what triggers the release of the egg during the menstrual cycle? So, ovulation occurs obviously in the ovulatory phase in the mid of the menstrual cycle. Okay, so if the menstrual cycle is 28 days in human females, the ovulation will occur at the mid of the menstrual cycle, means 14th day. What are the options here? Surge in the FSH level, second is surge in the LH level, third is the higher progesterone level, and fourth is the increased estrogen secretions. So what will be the correct answer here? Here the correct answer will be surge in the LH level. This is the correct answer here. Okay, so because of the rapid increase in the luteinizing hormone, which is known as the LH surge, there is a release of the egg. So this LH, this stimulates the rupture of the Graafian follicle. As the Graafian follicle rupture, then the secondary oocyte is released. Okay. Now, which hormone is primarily responsible for maintaining the endometrium during the luteal phase? So they are asking about the hormone which maintains the thickness of the endometrium during the luteal phase. So in luteal phase, the corpus luteum is formed from the remnants of the Graafian follicle. So Graafian follicle ruptures, it releases secondary oocyte, and the remaining parts of the Graafian follicle, it gets converted into the corpus luteum, which acts as a temporary endocrine gland and secretes a hormone which maintains the endometrium thickening. You have to name that hormone. So what are the options here? Estrogen, progesterone, FSH, and LH. Okay, the correct answer will be option B, progesterone. Progesterone, it maintains the endometrium thickness during the luteal phase because corpus luteum, it secretes progesterone. As long as the progesterone level is high, the endometrium thickness will be maintained and there will be no menstruation. Now, what marks the end of the reproductive phase in the human females? So, the oogenesis occurs at a particular stage only. So eggs are not produced throughout the life. These eggs are produced up to a certain age in the females. Around 50 years, at around 50 years of age, these egg production, the menstrual cycle stops. Okay. So the end of the reproductive phase in human females is known as, what is the scientific name given to it? Menarche, menopause, ovulation, and menstruation. These are the 4 options. If you choose the correct answer from these options, so here the correct answer will be menopause. Okay. So menopause is the cessation of the menstrual cycle. Means when the menstrual cycle stops. Menarche is when menstrual cycle begins at puberty. So time between menarche and menopause, this is the reproductive phase. Menopause is the end of the reproductive phase. Ovulation is the release of the egg from the ovaries, and then menstruation means the bleeding, the menstrual phase. It occurs due to the shedding of the endometrium. Then which phase follows the menstrual phase in the menstrual cycle? Okay. So after menstrual phase, what phase, you can say, is the next phase? Or menstrual phase is followed by which phase? Luteal phase, follicular phase, ovulatory phase, or secretory phase? Okay, here the correct answer will be follicular phase. Okay, the first is the menstrual phase during which bleeding occurs, then there is a follicular phase during which there is a gradual increase in FSH and LH. This FSH causes the development of the follicle. So in follicular phase, follicle development occurs. from primary follicle to secondary to tertiary, and then to finally to mature follicle that is known as the Graafian follicle. Okay, along with simultaneously what is happening, the endometrium is also regenerating. Then after the follicular phase, there is a ovulatory phase in which the Graafian follicle ruptures. There is a release of the secondary oocyte or the ovum, you can say. And then the last phase is the secretory phase, also known as the luteal phase, in which corpus luteum is formed, and corpus luteum acts as a temporary endocrine gland secreting a hormone known as progesterone, which is important for maintaining the endometrium thickness. And if there is no fertilization, the corpus luteum degenerates and the level of, you can say, progesterone decreases, and the menstrual cycle starts again as the endometrium becomes thin. So we have submitted all the answers. Okay, all the answers are correct. Okay, yeah. So this was the end of the session. I hope the session was quite knowledgeable for you. We'll meet you in the next session. Thank you very much for listening.